Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I want to particularly thank Mr. Eckert and Veronica for being here today, for your testimony. Like many of the folks in this room, I'm a parent. I have a 16-year-old son and a 14 and a 10-year-old. And this issue causes me great agony. And for you, my heart goes out to you and your wife. I pray for you and your family for what you've been through. I thank you for your courage to be here. It's incredible what you're doing, and thank you for raising awareness. And I intend to take your message back to my district and certainly to my family. But I wondered if you might be able to share with us what you believe, in your experience so far, is the most effective method of raising awareness, and what's the most efficient method in curtailing the use of synthetic drugs?
May I speak?
Can she address?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for having us here. Obviously, it's very difficult for Deb and I. Not only do we travel overnight from California, but we are so passionate about this subject. And laws take time to change. They obviously need to change now. But getting that public service announcements, which is now happening with the opiate and heroin epidemic, getting public service announcements out there, recognizing that these products are available in candy form, in liquid form, in the vapes, in the e-cigarettes, in the marijuana type leaf, getting that message out there to parents. They simply do not know. I said, I wish I could carry, I have a book this big that is full of stories from people who have lost their children, either to death or to mental illness from using. People simply don't know. It needs to be taught in the classrooms. Teachers need to know, physicians need to know, nurses need to know, counselors need to know, the public needs to know at large, and this is something that could be done immediately. Awareness, education, prevention. And I'd like to also mention that if you are 13, 14, 15, 17 years old, under 18 years old, and you become addicted to spice, and it is very addicted, where do they go? There is not a place for an addicted child to get treatment. And this is a very serious issue, needed to be discussed at another time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I appreciate your being here and appreciate your testimony. Agent Million and Officer Smith, I wondered if you might be able to address this issue. I as a former prosecutor, have had an interaction with law enforcement over the years. K2 was an issue not too long ago. Hit the stores. It was in the local gas stations, at the party stores. I got a call from one of my local police chiefs, Chief Narsh from Lake Orion Police Department, who told me that he was trying to get it off the shelves, but he couldn't do it because there was no legal authority to do that. How do we get ahead of this? What do we do to give you the tools in law enforcement to prepare for the next generation? And clearly, these folks that are selling them in the stores are selling them with knowledge that they're being used in an illicit way. They're not just bath salts or incense. It's being used by our youth in a way that's intended for some sort of high. How do we get ahead of this, and how do we? What can we do as Congress to help and give you the tools you need?
Thank you very much for the question. As I mentioned before, we've already identified hundreds, not based on theory, but based on overdoses, deaths, law enforcement encounters. We're getting multiple every month, so now we're talking dozens every year. So the most effective way to give immediate relief to our state and local partners and our federal partners is get them into Schedule 1. That would solve a couple problems. It would give us the ability to get them out of those stores, to be able to stop it at the border. But more importantly, we'd be able to increase the cost of those that are trafficking in it, not using it, trafficking in it in the United States, but then overseas, because they operate with impunity. That would be one fix. Another possible solution would have to do with that labeling. In the same way that with anabolic steroids, there's a bill that you have to have appropriate labeling. If there's false labeling, there may be some kind of a false labeling penalty that would increase the civil penalty and tamp down the incentive for these retail stores, the convenience stores, to have this in their places of business. So those are a couple ideas, but we'd be more than happy to work on providing any technical assistance in that area.
Representative, as Veronica spoke to it, PSA and getting the word out on the street, and I believe Mr. Buck or Mr. Gemhart spoke to the fact of these kids are buying this legally in stores. And again, thinking that it's a legal substance, they're not doing any of the hardcore street drugs that we used to see them do, cocaine, heroin, marijuana. They're not taking this out of the fact of the ramifications that come from using something that they buy at their convenience store for $5.
Thank you both very much. I wish we had more time on this. I'm in anything I can personally do, and I know others are the same way. Any way I can help, I would love to be a part of that solution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you, Congressman Labrador. I wondered if we got 1,000 questions here in a very small amount of time, but I wondered if I might ask Mr. Milion. The DEA's Project Synergy found that millions of dollars sales of these synthetics were being funneled back to the Middle East for what I assume to be terrorism purposes or funding terrorism. Can you comment on that and share more about that?
Sure. Project Synergy, it was a multi-year, multi-agency investigation, and you're right, about millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in proceeds were going back to the Middle East, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon. We continue to explore that. We work with our partners at the FBI and our Special Operations Division, which is a multi-agency coordination center. But that operation resulted in the seizure of almost 7,000 kilograms of cathinones, cannabinoids, and a number of successful hundreds of prosecutions. But we are still exploring that, and I wouldn't be able to speak to some of the threads of those investigations on the money.
One quick follow-up. We know that this is not necessarily manufactured here, that in many cases it comes from China overseas somewhere. How is the trafficking handled when it gets to the United States? Who does it? Cartels? Or,
well, on both the synthetic cannabinoid cathinone side, but on the fentanyl analogs, which are that deadly, much more potent than heroin synthetic, there's several ways, but the primary way is manufactured in China, sent into Mexico. Mexican cartels now are exploiting and capitalizing on the opioid epidemic in the country, obviously with their heroin trafficking, and they're taking the synthetic fentanyl, mixing it with heroin and other substances, and sending it across the border. Southwest border, couriers taking it into Lawrence, Massachusetts. Really, any part of the country is being touched. But you can also get it directly from China. You can order it over the internet. You could get this substance sent to you, delivered directly to your home. You could mix it with other compounds and then distribute it in the United States. It's a terrible, treacherous world that they're creating.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I yield back to Congressman Labrador.